because I stayed super curious and open-minded, I now have raised my awareness to understanding. So belief was like the bottom of the barrel. Knowingness had a lot more teeth, but the awareness that I have now, it's one of the reasons I see judgment, the opposite of it, is being open-minded.
"83% of Americans identify as not very happy, which can hold you back and negatively affect your relationships and your business." On this podcast, we discuss the proven steps to happiness so you can restore balance and rekindle your joy.
Welcome to another episode of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. Today we have Steve Richards. Steve, how are you, my friend?
Good, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you and I, we met, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago in an event, and we've kept in touch, and we're on similar journeys. And you and I have had some way longer than hour-long plus phone calls, and the stuff that we have discussed, I thought was pretty earth-shattering, pretty interesting. So I figured, why not get you on the podcast, and we'll give everyone a brief snippet of some of the deep stuff that we talk about. How's that sound?
Perfect. I'm in.
All right. So listen, man, you've been on this journey, right? You've learned a lot of stuff over these last 3 years. What are some of maybe the biggest takeaway? What's the best, most impactful thing you've learned on this journey?
I think this kind of ties into maybe some of the stuff we'll cover, but not getting into the past and all these things, just some kind of juicy, here's something I'm working on, and this is kind of where I'm headed with with one of the things I'm really calling my calling, I guess, my purpose right now. But it's this interesting idea that I think in general, if we keep it to the theme of your podcast here, I have thought for many years as a business coach, and I've owned other businesses. I've been very involved in coaching, consulting, working with people in different capacities for 25 years. Largely over that time, I felt like one of the core issues was people don't know what they want. Whenever they tell me what their goals are, I'm like, why? It doesn't usually take more than 2, max 3 whys where I say why, they're done. They're like, I don't know. Actually, I don't know why. And this will just go deep. We might as well get right into it. If they can't go 3 or 4 whys deep and then wind up at basically love or helping humanity, I already know that they're making some kind of plan based on I don't know, avoiding what they have or wanting something different or seeing someone else has something or what their parents wanted for them, or they're playing checkers and not really chess. And so the interesting thing is most people don't know what they want because it's really, really almost impossible to completely figure that out, is what I found out now. And this is one of the biggest nuggets I've opened up, I think, in my life, is that you can literally go from almost being impossible to figure out what you want because you keep thinking, oh, I want $1 million business. I want a $10 million business. I want to get married and have kids. I want to have 10% body fat. I want to have $1 million in my retirement account, whatever. Or I want to flip 100 houses, all these things. I don't know if you agree, but almost everyone I know, when they get those goals, they're like, oh, it wasn't what I thought. Right.
Everyone, not some people, everyone. I paid off my house. I'm like,
cool. And
I know it's not smart to pay off my house financially, but I'm gonna pay off my house because it's giving me a lot more security, financial security. It didn't give me more security. I celebrated for a day. Steve, if I would have known you in 2008 and I would have told you that I was starting Keller Williams team because I wanted to be the first agent team to ever sell 1 billion with a B in a year, you might have asked me why. And at the time, I don't know what I would have said, but I know now it would have led to my why was because I don't feel enough. And if I can make a company or be a team that sells $1 billion and no one's ever done that, then I'm going to be worthy and people will love me. And I lost $1 million.
That's exactly. But you found some things you needed to find because that was part of your story, finding your way to your path, right?
Yeah, that was part.
So
that was one
perfect
of 5
example.
Yeah, one of 5 mistakes that cost me $9 million. And when I look back, I didn't know my why on any of those. Now I know my why, and all of those mistakes were around my feeling of unworthiness.
Yeah, anyone, and I don't want to be a dick, but anyone who's got a PowerPoint, who's in one of the masterminds, that we're in, or is in life where they get, or they're successful, so they get brought into a meetup, and they have a PowerPoint, and one of the first things they always do is put the why on. It's a picture of their family, and they're like, "There's my why." Every time I'm like, boohoo, like, of course you love your family. Like, you're black hearted if you don't love your wife and kids. Like, and obviously that's interesting because there's divorce and all these other things that can happen. But my point is, like, your why is not your family. You're not there yet. If that's what you think, you're also, if that's where you think you are in life, then you're where you just said, and you're trying to build something to fill a void that you don't understand what the void is. So you're doing shit that's not going to matter. And so my point is like, I went from, like, over the course of, like, the first 10 to 15 years and helping, running businesses and being, when I came out of business school in the 90s, I was coaching. I had no business meeting with, I worked for big consulting firms, and I was meeting with startup.coms. I don't know. Maybe that's why they failed, because they were hiring idiots like 23-year-olds like me to come in and coach them. But, like, from that time all the way through my own journey in the first 10 years in real estate, and all the corporate America stuff before that. But the first 15, 20 years in life, I thought I figured out the fact that, like, the biggest problem is nobody knows what they want. And so that was like a systemic thing that I used all the time with clients. Oh, you don't know what you want. And then I would prove it to them. Tell me your goals. Most of them don't really have good goals. And then if they do, it takes 2 whys, maybe 3 max, for me to shatter it. And then they're like, I don't really know. And so I kind of hung my hat on that. But this last year and a half, Brad, I'll tell you, it is a systemic issue, but it's not a source issue. A source issue on why you don't know what you want is because you don't know who you are.
You took my next question. Why do so many people not know what they want and what their why is? So,
And if you figure out who you are first, well, I was gonna say, if you figure out who you are first, just to add the punchline to that statement is that figuring out what you want is actually pretty easy. So it goes from being next to impossible to being almost easy to do if you do them in the right order, because most people are setting what they think they want. And in the journey of doing that, they're figuring out who they are. But if you just figure out who you are first, you'll automatically know what you want.
And why don't most people know who they are?
Because because they don't really want to know, because they're scared. But no one has told you this is an important part of life. And it takes 2 things, like going upward to figure out why we're here. What's my mission in life? Ours is very similar. Like mine, specifically, my one-liner is, I help business owners find their way. I'm a way shower. And specifically right now, my calling is to help business owners find their way. I do that several ways. I have coaching business. I have my team architects business. I'm a leader in a couple masterminds. Like I have mentors, or I mean mentees, that I'm mentoring. I have friends that I help. Like, there's all these different ways I interact with business owners. But the reality is, I'm very clear on why I'm here. So I know what I want. Now, one thing I had to do was go get margin in my life. Finally, I found enough success and had enough pain along the way to get to the point where, and it's just, this part of it is the love of life and everything kind of finally started, the light started shining through for me. But part of it is starting to get, when your business becomes successful, one of the benefits is you realize that isn't what's going to make you happy. But now you have some free time and some money on your hands. So, like, you can drop some cash going to Central America and drinking ayahuasca and meet with shaman. You can do some things you can't do when your phone's ringing off the hook and you're stressed and you don't have any time or money, right? And so we can start to explore upward what our mission is a big part of it. But honestly, what you work with, I think, is even more important. It's not half, but the other part of it is understanding to dig down into the shadows to understand the foundation of why we are the way we are. It's shadow work. It's understanding, you would call it trauma. I would call it wounding. like it's the same thing. And whenever we have experiences in life, it shapes who we are. And when we have wounding, we learn a behavior because of it. And that behavior creates a line where this is how this works. I have to perform to get love or whatever it is. But underneath that whatever that is that took shape, underneath it is a shadow. And I can't see what's in the shadow because it's dark. And so like I have blind spots now. And through whatever ways I can get there, if I can start to do the shadow work, which is to understand why I am the way I am and where my blind spots are, and at the same time explore um, why I'm here, my bigger mission, like those are the two things that once I got to figure both ends of that out. Does that make sense? Two sides of the same coin for me to
Yeah.
figure out who I am.
Yeah. So, Steve, we these masterminds you're talking about, a lot of these folks are making a lot of money, but I think a lot of these folks you're describing a lot of these folks, not just masterminds, the whole world, pretty much. The people that are the high level making money, they're they don't necessarily have great relationships. They don't necessarily have great health. What can the folks that are listening to this podcast who are making a lot of money or are in a job, but they're just like I was, like I didn't know why I was making a bunch of money in hindsight to prove my worth, right? How can they find their why? And how do they find who they are, and then from that their why?
So it's everybody's got their own path, which is cool. And it makes it hard because it's not like here's masculinely, and I don't mean macho masculine. I mean masculinely, even if you're a female, if you're a woman, you still have this masculine energy, but it's to like want to know exactly what we have to do, define it, have bullet points, and go work the plan. And like, it doesn't work that way because a lot of you need to set the intention of figuring out who you are and create a plan on what you want to achieve, which is figure out who you are and why, so you can uncover your mission in life, you know? But how it happens, there's this feminine flow and you got to roll with it. Why do I have relationships that don't work out? Why do I keep firing employees why have I had divorces? Or why do I am I 40 pounds overweight? Or why did I go through bankruptcies with my businesses? Or like all these things in life are mirrors.
Mm.
Everything's a mirror. There's some like deep esoteric shit we can get into where it's like you and I are the same person. We're just a fractal of God living two different versions of the same life. You know what I mean? Like there's this really deep stuff, as you know, I can go into, but like without getting super deep on it, I will say this is like something that is at the depths of therapy and at the top of like the woo-woo world. So it's kind of the meeting of the scientific and the woo-woo is that there is this understanding of like a mirror and triggering. And so when I know that like everything's a mirror, it's just showing me how I'm showing up. So the real mirror shows me how I'm showing up with my diet and exercise. You know, my marriage is showing me how I show up in intimate relationships. My business is showing me how I'm showing up with providing value to the world and earning an income. And so the more psychological side of that is projection. And people get to that sometimes where you start to understand that without getting too woo-woo. You'll learn that in therapy if you go long enough. Is that if I start to see anything, like I'm thinking like, man, Brad's kind of an asshole. Like, yeah, you might be being one, but the fact that I'm zoning in on it and seeing it is that I'm worried I either am one or I am one.
Mm.
I'm an a-hole myself. You know what I mean? Like, so the general thing that I've learned from the therapy side is if you spot it, you got it. And so part of this is like,
So, Steve, hang on a second. So I'm in a room with you. I am being an asshole, and you have done the work and you're enlightened. How do you process me or Jimmy or John being an asshole?
I just see it and I think, oh, they're being an asshole, but it's probably for a reason. I
Yeah.
bet they're having this or that, and I just see it for what it is. It's not that I don't see it as you being an asshole anymore. But if I'm like walking out, I'm like, damn, man, he's an asshole. Like, what an asshole. And like later, I'm like, man, Brad Chandler's an asshole. I'm telling someone on the phone, like when it's bothering me, when it's not sitting well with me. But when I'm in the room and I'm like, that sucks that he's feeling that bad. He must have some. And then I leave and I'm on to the next thing. Like I just see it for what it is. And
Yes.
so
he must have some pain. Instead of judging and saying he's an asshole and going tell 10 other people, which I used to be that guy, I now look at someone and they're like, well, he's an asshole. And I say, no, at his core, he's just light and love. He's hurting. So maybe we could walk over and say, hey, the way that you're talking to other people indicates that you might be struggling. Is there anything I can do to help you? Do you want to talk? And I'm not perfect at that.
Yeah, they don't want to hear that. By the way.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's fair to say everyone doesn't want to hear that. So some people might, right? And maybe that's a bad example, but the point I'm trying to make, Steve, is we're not perfect, but instead of looking at people like we used to and judging them constantly, we now see people with compassion, and it's just such a better way to live life.
Yeah, and so exactly what you said is I would just lop the front half of that off and just walk up and be like, hey man, do you want to talk about anything? Like I would make space for you. And then you would be like, yeah, I do, or no, I don't. And then I would know where you stand. So I don't know. You're right. Some people do want to talk. Yeah, I do want to talk. Like, but just being available and making space, holding space for someone like that might even just, honestly, holding space might even be just me not thinking you're an asshole and walking out being like, I don't want to be around that guy because he's an asshole. Might be me willing to just sit there and be okay with it. I don't even say anything to you.
Yeah.
And you might subtly pick up on the fact that you just went off and Steve didn't get triggered and leave. So you immediately think I might be more safe because I didn't get up and leave like everybody leaves, which is that subconscious. You're like, oh, everyone leaves when I do that. Like,
and that could be
and you already know that anytime you judge.
Sorry, there's a little delay here. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So them being the asshole and pushing people away could be their way of protecting them, because as a child, they opened up, they were their vulnerable self, their authentic self, and mom or dad yelled at them or cussed at them or made fun of them. So that could just be a defense mechanism that once you taught that person that, look, I will still be here and I'm not going to run, they're like, oh my gosh, so I don't need to be an asshole to protect myself.
Yep. And the reality is our brains are so powerful that they know we have this issue, this unresolved issue, like you just said, where our parents made us feel a certain way. And you're getting triggered uncontrollably, like it's visceral, potentially. Something triggers you to be an asshole. Your brain thinks it's helping you by making you continue to act like an asshole because it's trying to get you to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like your brain thinks it's recreating this unresolved issue. So it's like, oh, you're welcome, Brad. I made you be an asshole again so that everyone else gets pissed and leaves so you can fix it. But everyone just gets pissed and leave. And the way you interpret it, because you don't understand that, is like, oh, this always happens. I'm such an asshole. Everyone leaves. Like, I'm just an asshole.
Yeah.
And they're assholes for leaving. Everyone's assholes. Right. And then it's like nobody gets any better. And so when you realize that everyone you're with has a trigger and a neglect wound, and usually we're triggering each other, and some people more than others.
You were saying
back to what I was saying is
judging.
Well, I was going to say two things. One, I was going to say is about the judging. I was going to say, if you're ever judging anyone, you're just judging yourself. I'm sure you talk about that on the podcast a lot. I mean, if you ever, as soon as you're judging someone, it's the same thing of what I said, when you spot it, you got it. It's when you're judging someone for behavior, you are dealing with that behavior. You're either very sensitive to it because you're avoiding it like the plague because it happened to you from your parents, or you're doing it and you are really kind of judging yourself by being like, well, I'm an asshole, but they're a real asshole. Like they're a super asshole. Like I'm not that much of an asshole. But it's this juxtaposition of dealing with the fact that there's triggers and wounding and all this stuff. And what I was going to say is everybody's just a mirror. And so the opportunity is this. When I say everyone's a mirror, and so if your wife's doing something that makes you upset, that because life isn't duality, meaning it's one or the other, it's actually both all the time. It's everything all at once. Your perspective makes you want to think, is my wife being a bitch or am I being an asshole? Sorry, people don't cuss on your podcast too much. But anyway, it's like, it's both. She's doing her thing, but the way you're triggering is you doing your thing, right? And so like people want it to be one or the other, and they go to therapy and they're like, well, I don't know if I'm just being unreasonable or she's being terrible. It's probably both, because you're both dealing with your own issues. or whatever. But the reality is, that's why you can sit in a room later when you're more enlightened, if you want to call it that. Like I agree with that term to some degree. Um, but like when you're more enlightened, you can sit there and just see it for what it is and be like, that person's hurt and they haven't figured out yet that that behavior doesn't help.
Yeah,
Probably because they're dealing with some unresolved wounding that's making them trigger. And if they would just understand there's a trigger, they might still act like that, but they would immediately apologize for it and it would diminish over time because they would be aware of it.
yeah. In my two marriages, it was their fault. And from their perspective, it was my fault. So, yeah, now I see that. I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, here's how I contributed to it. Let's go back to the judging thing, because when I learned this concept 3.5 years ago, I had a really hard time with that. And now I better understand it, but I'm sure there's some listeners who do too. So you're in Walmart and you see mama spanking her child, and you're like, well, that lady, oh my God, that's the worst thing she could ever do. Like, what kind of evil mom is her? Um, Explain to someone how that's still projecting, that there's something about themselves that they're projecting.
So you have to separate the action from the behavior. So yeah, you might be a person who's like, yeah, I can judge them because I would never hit my kid. So now you think it's okay to judge them because you're like, I would never hit my kid. But the behavior is maybe forcefully, imposing your will on somebody else and hurting them. Maybe not physical, maybe emotional. And so the idea is like, where in your life are you potentially enforcing behavior on people that might be hurting them?
Interesting.
And so this is why the work is so hard, because you have to really start to understand some things to separate this. And so actually, what you really want to separate is even deep. If we can go this deep in this, like we don't have time to go super, super deep, but the action is the surface level everybody's looking at. But the behavior is really where you start to get to underline, like I just said, but even deeper is your intention. What was your intention before you chose to have that behavior? And so like at the intention level is where we start to get to somewhere, because it's like, I intend not to let someone hurt me because I've been hurt. And if I hurt them before they hurt me, I won't get hurt. Which could, in that lady's life, is spanking her kid. In your life, it might be like being unfair to your employees.
Wow, that's awesome.
But it's the same problem.
Yeah. So
This is one thing while we're on this topic, like I want to add this before we switch gears.
yeah,
The most judgmental people are usually doing it out of defense. Not only everything we just said about judgment, but here's another interesting thing, because I've really deprogrammed religiously, but I've never understood or loved God more than I do. I wear this necklace because Jesus is my homie. Like I pattern my life after him. And he was not in a religion, by the way. In fact, he was so non-religious, the religion killed him. But my point is not to make this about religion, but it's a good way for most people to see this. So a lot of Christians are judging people. If you're a Christian, you might take offense to it, but the reality is most largely it's a common thing that people think you're judging, because you actually are. Like you're saying, oh, you can't do this, or you can't act this way, or you can't do this. That's just judgment, right? So what's interesting is like I see in that world, I see it all over the place, but specifically in the world of religion, I see people get very defensive. And they're like, you can't do this. Or the only truth is in the Bible. If it's not between those two covers, it's not real. And all these things, right? But what I realize is the more unstable you are with your foundation, the more defensive you get when someone rocks it. And so when someone comes along like me and says, I love God and I believe in Jesus and I don't go to church anymore, the way with a formalized religion, it's not that I don't go to church. I actually believe church is the people and whatever. I have a different understanding. I don't go to a formal religious setting anymore. And if I did, I would enjoy parts of it. I don't agree with parts of it. I'm not even mad about it. It's just I've kind of outgrown that, because I don't need a middleman anymore for God. But my point is this: I see a lot of judgment that turns into defensiveness. And one underlying thing is not only wounding and triggering, but I wanted to say this about judgment while we're on this topic, because this is really important. In religion, you don't ever get to build a super deep foundation because they tell you to have faith. And when you doubt the unseen, they're like, look, don't worry about it. The cornerstone of religion, when you have belief, when I believe in God and I start to have doubt, they ask me to have a stronger faith. And faith by nature is required with belief. And belief means I'm going under an assumption that someone told me. Like, literally, that's what belief is. Like, I have a belief, meaning I believe this to be true. Like, I don't know for myself. That's why faith is required. And it's really the rub. It's really the friction with the whole thing. Church was really smart. The Roman Catholic Church was really smart to say, hey, this is the rub, that when you meet it, it's where the rubber meets the road, the rub, the friction. But we're going to turn it into the thing that every time you run into it, we're going to be like, oh, your faith's not strong enough. Oh, you're doubting? You need more faith. I completely agree that faith is a catalyst to get over this hump of belief. But where I differ from that, and the reason I brought this up is because, in my opinion, this is a cure to judgment. Since we talked about judgment, I want to talk about how I think you can cure it.
Yep.
Is plain and simple curiosity. So now when I have doubt in my belief, I start to become curious, and I'm like, I don't know. I want to experience God for myself. So I literally, some ways I've done that, like I just said a minute ago, was go underneath deep psychedelics and with shaman and going in and understanding the Jewish religion and understanding the Kabbalah and understanding like even deeper religions. We have recency bias in the last couple thousand years as Christians, like even understanding like the Epic of Gilgamesh and all these tablets that existed 20 and 30,000 years ago, which was their Bible back then. I've opened myself up to become curious to all of it. I don't just stay trapped in, when I doubt things, I don't say trapped by like, don't look behind a curtain. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing here. Just have faith. Well, I pulled the curtain back and I started researching everything. Dude, you know what? I have had personal experiences now to where now I know that God exists and I understand better because I went beyond my curiosity, took me into a knowingness because of personal experiences that I never had before. And because I stayed super curious and open-minded, I now have raised my awareness to understanding. So belief was like the bottom of the barrel. Knowingness had a lot more teeth, but the awareness that I have now, it's one of the reasons I see judgment, the opposite of it is being open-minded. And the bridge is curiosity. And now when someone says something, I'm like, I don't know, I'll listen, you know?
Yeah,
and so
drop the mic on that. Just if you take one thing and one thing only from this half an hour, it's get out of judgment and into curiosity, and you'll start to see your business thrive, your relationships thrive, your spouse, your kids, whatever. It's going to get better. Even with yourself, start with yourself. If you're not going to the gym or you're drinking too much, instead of being judgmental about yourself, just get curious. Why am I doing this? Why am I not taking the path that's better for myself and my family? So, Steve, what are you doing now in the world to make an impact?
do you mind if I add one thing to what you said before I
Go ahead, sure.
jump on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you just mentioned drinking. This is a powerful thing that I bet a lot of people listening to this deal with this issue with drinking or smoking too much weed at night to go to bed or whatever, or taking pills. It's just common in our world. It's common in the entire world, but like in the business world, I know, guys are eating Adderall like candy, or they're, smoking weed at night, or they drink too much. Because I was one of them. What's really interesting with what you were just saying, this is something I'll just leave it. We'll just leave it as something to sit with because I think it's really important. But I was just with someone this last weekend who's drinking too much. And we were talking about it and they're like, man, I wish, because I've basically stopped drinking. I'll drink, like sometimes I'll gear up because I'm hanging out with people who like to drink, and I'll have to gear up for it because I want to. Like I want to hang out, like and it's not because it's peer pressure. It's just like, it sounds cool or fun. I don't do it anymore, really. And then I might have fun for an hour and then I don't sleep well and I don't eat well, and I'm like, oh, now I remember why I don't ever drink anymore. But largely, he was like, how did you stop drinking? And I was really sitting with that, and I'd never had to stop, because like, this is kind of a playing chess versus checkers thing comment here that I'll just drop in. So like, playing checkers is like, you only got a couple moves, right? Like, one of them is like, how do you stop drinking as the person you are? You know what's funny is I wasn't really me. And I never worried about stop drinking. I never had to stop drinking. What I did was I found who I was, which wasn't something I did. It was more like something I allowed. I surrendered to who I've always been. And that dude doesn't drink. I never had to stop. I never had to think why I don't. And I also never had to start working out like crazy the way I do now, because this guy who I really am stays in shape, and he doesn't drink, and he's way less judgmental. Right. And there's all these things. And all I did was align with my natural true self. I became curious about who I really am. And all that shit I didn't have to deal with. It just went away. Like, drinking was never a thing I had to reckon with. I just realized sometime, like, oh, I haven't drank for like 3 months. I don't even care.
Yeah. It
I
wholly went
wanted to
away.
add that to this because it was powerful.
Yeah, I love it. It went away in my life. Again, occasionally I'll have a drink. I've completely cut out weed, and I was the guy who was smoking weed every night for years, telling me this myself the lie that it helped me sleep when it just destroys your REM. But I know that kind of what you're saying, I think, is that as you became your authentic self, you no longer had to hide behind this veil of trying to be someone else. And so therefore you don't need the weed. So or the drinking or whatever it is. So we got to wrap here. Just tell us quickly what you're
And I didn't
doing. I
have
know you're doing.
the big piece is I didn't have to reckon. Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish that sentence. The big piece is what, and then just wrap by telling us what you're doing cool in the world.
Yep. Yeah, I was just saying, you don't have all these things you think you have to do. Like, you have to reconcile religion, you have to stop drinking, you have to go to the gym. No, if you just, what I wanted to say is the reckoning is dealing with figuring out who you really are. And all these other things come into play. And when you're just down here fighting all the battles, you can't win the war. You'll quit drinking for 6 months, but then you'll start again. You lose weight and then you get fat again. Like, aligning
Yeah.
with your authentic self, I love the way you put it, is the way you win the war. It's like checkmate, right? So, along those lines, to kind of get into so for me, I own a company called Team Architects, and we help people design, build, and run profitable teams. And so it's a way that I help entrepreneurs who are stuck and they don't realize, they think their business is the thing. And they're like, oh, I just got to get my business figured out. I'm like, well, actually, you need to get yourself figured out. But I know that we're unlocking business owners by helping them get teams so they can scale and get that margin in their life to where they can start to wake up. That's one. And I have a CEO coaching business called the CEO Nation, where I do one-on-one coaching with people largely in the 1 to 5 million revenue range, helping them get out of the day-to-day and scale. And those are very similar, that I know that I'm trying to help business owners move forward. Because again, I know that we're all here for a big mission. And as business owners, we have the capability of enterprise. And so we can like weaponize or mechanize delivering things to the world. And when we get right in our alignment, we will no longer be looking at business, and we will realize we're making a difference in humanity. And so, like, more deeply recently, I've started running experiences or retreats, I would call them, where I just take a handful of people to do plant medicines or deep therapeutic things. But all of it, Brad, is, and if you follow me on Facebook, I post every once in a while, or like anything I do, or if I get on a phone call, or like with you, I just send you these random 7-page texts, or I give you a book to read. But I largely want business owners to move forward and find out who they are, so they know why they're here. Because I know what will happen is we affect our clients and our employees and our vendors and our lenders and our partner. We, as business owners, we make more change in the world than churches do, in my opinion. And we know how to utilize capitalism to distribute something. And so once we get into alignment, I know everything comes back to love, light, right, humanity, and we want to make a difference. That doesn't mean we're not making a bunch of money, by the way, because I think it can all go together in abundance. But I'm just here to try to help many business owners as I can, who are ready for it, to move forward closer to who they are. And I do that with a few businesses and yeah,
Yeah. So
or podcasts like this.
speaking of light and love and authentic self, if you want to kind of take a quick gauge of your journey and your life and where things stand, you want to know if you're being your authentic self, just go take 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes out of your life and go to unlocklimitlessyou.com/quiz and take our self-love quiz. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see the results. No matter what they are, it's going to give you awareness of the behavior in your life. So Steve, how can people reach out to you and find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I know we talked about it. You're kind of running it here on the bottom, I think, but it's just probably connect with me on Facebook. I mean, I've got websites and company, all this stuff, but the reality is like just connecting with anybody through DMs or like, follow me and comment and be like, hey, bro, I heard you on Brad's podcast. It's pretty insane. Like, as we wrap up here, maybe I'll leave you with this. I had this great download the other day through meditation. Was that like, I was exploring my more flow, like letting life flow more. And I realized like I wanted to explore serendipity and synchronicity as part of that. It was deeper than that. We'll do that on another podcast. But that portion of it was really interesting because the download I got was serendipity is really just the feeling behind synchronicity in some ways. And synchronicity is something we like deja vu. We think it's something that pops up every once in a while, right? Like it's a thing occurrence that can happen. Bro, I was shown that all 8 billion people, every second of every day, it's all synced. All of it. That's how the world works. It's all in full sync. And when we have a moment of lucidness to see the synchronicity that's all around us all the time, we see it as synchronicity, but it's just us like seeing through our ego for a minute and be like, oh, man, that was very serendipitous that Brad and I ran into each other in a mastermind and like whatever. And now and that's when we were both real estate minded and business minded and probably the least healthy of our lives mentally or, whatever.
Yeah.
And like now we have this foundation of trying to, dude, that stuff was synced. We ran into each other at Eddie Speed's event all those years ago because of, and so it was really eye opening to me to understand that like serendipity is just, it's constant, and synchronicity is it's just how it works. It's not every once in a while. And so, my point with that is if you hit me on Facebook, read some posts and comment or DM me or whatever, or text Brad. Definitely take this quiz and ask him for my number. I don't even care how we meet. I just wanted to give this information out on a podcast,
So on Facebook, it's Steve Richards with an S in Indy, INDY.com. So Steve, that was awesome. You have a really amazing way of explaining things that are deep in a very easy way. So I appreciate that. I always love chatting with you. I can't wait to have many more of these conversations in the future. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, brother. Thank you for having me.
That concludes another episode of How to Be Happy for Entrepreneurs. Remember, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people break down and get rid of these limiting beliefs that are keeping them from living the life that they so deserve. So I need your help. I can't do this alone. So please, if you like this, can you please rate it, review it, share it, whatever you can do to get the word out. I would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, love heals all.
Hit subscribe if you don't want to miss out on more life-changing content. And if you're struggling, you don't have to. Go to bradchandler.com/contact. There, you can join the Facebook community of like-minded entrepreneurs, and you'll see a button to schedule your freedom and happiness call. See you on the next episode.